Hi, welcome to this training video that's going to walk through how to build a SOMP, or Summary of Measurement Properties table. The Summary of Measurement Properties table, nicknamed the SOMP, is a standardized way of reporting on each of the findings of a measurement property review in order that it improves the transparency of our findings and our conclusions. It gives access to the key information about each study and shows how we make decisions in the review process to get to a recommendation of whether or not this instrument has passed the OMRAC filter and should be used in a core outcome set. So it should become a recognizable, accessible tool for anyone in the OMRAC community, a one-stop shop for understanding a given instrument. So let's have a bit of an orientation to the SOMP. The top part of it is the background or the target use. We're always having one SOMP per situation in which we want this instrument to be used and one SOMP per instrument. So it outlines the target domain, elements of the peacock, the search dates, and background information about the search and how we intend to apply the results of the search. The middle section is the review findings. So the rows are each study that contribute measurement property evidence to our decision making, and the columns represent the measurement properties that are critical to deciding if instruments are a good fit for a core outcome set. And the bottom is our synthesis section. It shows how we use this evidence to come to a conclusion about each measurement property and then about the instrument as a whole. So now we'll go through actually building a bit of a SOMP. Where does it start? Well, the early steps in instrument selection are already done. The domain match and feasibility have been done. You've set aside instruments that are not a good match or aren't feasible for you to use. And now you're starting to embark on looking at the more in-depth literature review. So as you start building your SOMP, put in here the date that your working group signed off that it's a good match for truth and that it's a feasible instrument to use, and you document that there. We then start to gather the evidence, and passing the filter means that you have good performance on key measurement properties that were assessed in a similar context of use, or similar peacocks, similar patients, similar types of comparisons being made. And we review studies that were done to test these measurement properties. That's the source of evidence. And these are the measurement properties that we need evidence on: construct validity, reliability inter-method, which means things like between raters, between machines, responsiveness or longitudinal construct validity, test-retest reliability, discrimination in a clinical trial type of setting, so differences and differences, and then documentation of meaningful thresholds, be they benchmarks or minimally important differences. So to gather this measurement property evidence, you're going to be doing a thorough search of the literature and then screening that review to find articles that looked at measurement property evidence and selecting the ones that you will use for your evidence based on that. Once the articles are identified, which is a big task, you're asked to look at which measurement properties did each one actually examine and test. You'll soon find that measurement reviews are actually parallel reviews because each measurement property is a mini review in itself. And then we're doing a parallel review of 6 different properties. So now you can start populating the middle section of the SOMP. The studies that contributed the evidence are put in the rows, and then you can place an X to indicate which measurement properties were covered in that study. It gives you an immediate sense of the body of literature that you're going to have available for you. And already we're avoiding selective reporting bias of only certain studies that maybe had more favorable results or worse results. This is going to be a new review of the literature. Theoretically, you could stop here. It would give you an inventory of the evidence, identify any obvious gaps, and decide whether or not it's worth continuing. But it doesn't say what was actually found in these studies or how well the studies were done. One thing we want to point out here is that the SOMP is designed, or hopefully will be clear about what has been done. So it's going to immediately show you that the quality of methods haven't been done, or the results are not really saying whether it's performing well or poorly. So it's a good tracking tool for understanding what has and has not yet been done in this review. The quality of methods check is the typical next step in a typical review, where you're looking to see whether the methods were good enough to avoid a bias in the estimation of that measurement property. So it's a risk of bias assessment. At OMRAT, we have the good methods checklist, which really helps us to say, are the methods good enough to avoid any fatal flaws in their design? And we color code the SOMP cells. So red means that that particular piece of evidence had a fatal flaw. Amber means maybe you had some cautions about that particular piece of evidence, but it's good to go. And green means good to go. So amber and green always mean move forward, but it means amber always means to use a little bit of caution in using this evidence. So now your SOMP table has moved from uncolored to colored, still with the X's in each cell. The other thing we can do at this point is to tally up the body of evidence that's available. So counting all the studies that had any sort of evidence for that measurement property, and then counting the ones that you're going to use in synthesis, because in synthesis we do not include the cells that were red that had that fatal flaw. So you might see under test-retest reliability, we had 3 pieces of evidence available. One we deemed as having a fatal flaw, so now we're only going to use 2 in the final synthesis. For the full review, we want to see 2 or more studies per measurement property that were of good enough quality, i.e. that were not red. So that's what we're striving for, and you'd be able to tell at this point in time whether there were any gaps and whether you had to do additional studies to fill those gaps. So the next step is to look at the results of the study. So what did it say? Did it say that the instrument had good reliability or bad reliability? Were the results also good enough? So this is where we change the X to reflect the results of the study. So we did a literature review on different standards or thresholds for what good enough construct validity or reliability was. And we created provisional thresholds for what we considered at OMRAT to be good enough. So if it met or exceeded those thresholds, then you would put a plus in the box. If it did not meet it, then you'd put a minus. And if it was equivocal, then you'd have a plus minus. Now, we did do a review of the literature on these different studies with a group called the Best Outcome Selection Study group, and we found like over 40 standards for what would be considered good enough construct validity. And I've just blown up some here to show you that it's quite variable how it's deemed to be good enough in the literature, but it was based on these standards that we came up with the provisional set for OMRAT. So you could stop here. You have an overview of the literature. It includes quality. It's including the results now, but there's no formal synthesis at this point in time. So the next step for us is to do that synthesis. We could have skipped the quality part and just did the results. So you'd have a list of the evidence, what studies are contributing which evidence. You'd have the results. You'd have no synthesis and nothing to say what did you think about it, and no quality appraisal. But again, at least it's clear. And a lot of the literature reports like this. At OMRAT, however, we do want that synthesis. We want to see how you pull the results together. So we're looking for consistent results from good quality studies. And that means more than 2 studies that had good enough quality and we're finding consistent positive or negative results. And then you would rate each measurement property column, green, amber, or red, to get you a profile across the measurement properties. And that's an example of a profile here. The one example here is also showing that you can have a gray and not applicable box. And that was under the column for inter-method reliability, where inter-observer or inter-machine or inter-anything reliability was not a concern for this particular instrument. We then move into making a conclusion for the instrument as a whole. So taking that profile, it leads to a final recommendation. So if you have solid green across the profile, then you can have a green rating that you're recommending a full endorsement of this instrument for this application in the core outcome set. A mixture of amber and green would lead to a provisional endorsement, an amber endorsement. And based on the findings that you had, we'd ask you to identify what would need to be worked on to bring this up to a fully endorsed instrument, a green level. And if you have any measurement property cells in the measurement property profile that are either red or white meaning that there's no evidence available, it means that this is not yet ready for a level of endorsement at OMRAT. So we'd ask that you continue. The other thing we do when we get to this endorsement is that we take it back to the OMRAC community for a vote that they agree, a ratification vote that they agree with this level of endorsement based on the evidence that's been provided and the process that was followed. And we document that date of ratification over in the bottom left-hand corner of the SOMP. So the SOMP then, as we said, is a standardized way of reporting on each of the measurement properties in a measurement property review so that we can improve the transparency of our findings, give you access to the key information, and show you how decisions were made to get to a final conclusion about whether or not this instrument has passed the OMRAC filter and can be included in a core outcome set. So it allows us to track the progress of the review and just keep on moving through the checklist and documenting it as you build your SOMP. It gives a lot of clarity about what was done and what wasn't done, what was included in making conclusions, and in reporting the basic results. But this fits more than just OMRAC's needs. You may find it's useful for grants or for a thesis summary or reports where you have to give some sort of a summary of findings table for your review. Thank you very much, and I hope this was helpful in orienting you to the Summary of Measurement Properties table. Thank you.